Hello and welcome to Daily News Simplified, the what, why, and how of newspaper analysis from the perspective of UPSC examination. Today we are going to cover the Hindu newspaper dated 22nd of January 2020. The articles which we are going to cover today are displayed on the screen. Let's begin the discussion. This article appears on page number 12. India Brazil to sign strategic action plan. Now President Bolsonaro is to be the chief guest of the Republic Day celebrations. And it is expected that India and Brazil are going to sign an action plan along with bilateral investment treaty during such a visit. With respect to bilateral investment treaty, it is important for us to understand what bilateral investment treaty is, what are the features of BIT generally, what is the current framework under which India is going to sign bilateral investment treaty. It becomes important from the perspective of GS3 economy as well as international relations under GS2. Now, as far as the definition of bilateral investment treaty is concerned, they are agreements between two countries for the reciprocal promotion and protection of investments in each other's territories by individuals and companies situated in either state. So, for example, there are two nations, A and B, and they sign bilateral investment treaty. After the signing of such an agreement, A will have to protect investments by companies and individuals belonging to country B into its territory, and similarly the same protection has to be given by companies and individuals belonging to A but investing in B. Now, bilateral investment treaties encourage foreign investors to invest in a state and thereby contributing towards overall developments and advancement of the economy. Now, in a globalized scenario, this has become inevitable as investors and companies expect a minimum level of protection when they start to invest in a country. Now, as far as features of BIT are concerned, there are 7 features which all BITs must include. Now, the first is national treatment. Now, what does that mean? Now, under national treatment, it is expected from the country where investments are being made that the foreign investors in that country should be treated at par with the domestic investors. So, there shall not be any discrimination based on the source of investment. The second is MFN treatment, which expands into most favorable nation treatment, which means that the concession extended to foreign investors of a particular country would be extended to foreign investors of other country as well. So going back to the same example, let's say there are 3 countries in this scenario and we are talking about investments into B. So if investors belong to a country A are getting certain concessions. So according to MFN treatment, the investments from country C and the companies from company C should also get the same treatment as A is getting, and this is called most favored nation treatment. Third feature is bilateral investment treaty should bar expropriation. Now, what is expropriation? Expropriation means taking over property, and BITs generally bar the state from expropriating or taking away the foreign investment except under exceptional circumstances, and those circumstances are also specified in the BIT. Next comes fair and equitable treatment and full protection and security. Now these two are interrelated, which mandate the state to have a stable and predictable legal framework regulating investments which meets the reasonable expectation of the investors. Now in simple language, which means that if a country's legal framework is not stable, then the foreign investors would not consider that country as a reliable investment destination. And hence, BIT mandate that as far as the economy is concerned, it should be predictable and stable. And full protection and security means that states will provide full protection and safety to foreign investments, which is the least expectation an investor can have. Now, as far as repatriation of investment and return is concerned, if companies belonging to a country A are investing in B, obviously they expect return out of it, which is basically in form of profit, and they would want to repatriate that profit back to country A or any other country C. And hence BIT's mandates that the states provide unrestricted power to the foreign investors to repatriate their investments and returns. So it's basically a freedom to invest and to de-invest as well. Now, the last item has been deliberately written in red color, which is investor state dispute resolution. Now, foreign investors, when they invest in a country, obviously they have to deal with the local laws and regulations. And while carrying out their business at destination, they face legal struggles as well. Now, foreign investors can directly initiate arbitration proceedings against a state without approaching its own government. To handle such a dispute, an ad hoc tribunal may be set up in accordance with the arbitration rules of United Nations Commission on International Trade Law. Now, this provides freedom to the investors to directly approach an arbitration without going into legal muddles of a home country. So, for example, if a foreign investor has invested in India and a dispute arises between that foreign investor and government of India. Now, generally the case should ideally go to a high court or any other court in India. But if India signs bilateral investment treaty, it mandates the government of India to take that dispute to a resolution by passing Indian law. Now, this particular provision of the BITs has created a lot of ruckus in the past, as the BITs signed by India in the past gave extensive protection to the foreign investment with scant regard for states' interests based on neoliberal model. For example, a number of foreign corporations slapped investor state dispute resolution notices against India, challenging a wide range of regulatory measures such as the imposition of retrospective taxation by Vodafone, famously known as Vodafone case, and you remember the cancellation of 2G licenses, spectrum licenses, and revocation of telecom licenses. Now, these investor state dispute resolution cases against India led to a rethink, and government has come up with a model BIT in 2016 and has also terminated unilaterally all the BITs signed with 60 countries so far. Now let us understand the key provisions of the model BIT, as this is the foundation framework under which all the future BITs shall be signed by India. Now the first key provision of the model BIT, and also a major change from the past BITs, is that it changes the definition of the investment from asset based to enterprise based. Now the asset based definition of the investment under the earlier BITs has been replaced by enterprise based definition under the model BIT. Now, asset based definition considers every kind of asset, both movable and immovable, including the IPRs, as investment and gives protection under the treaty. Now, moving away from an asset based approach to an enterprise based approach aims at narrowing the scope of investments to be protected and thus seeks to reduce the number of BIT claims that can be brought against India. Second key feature of model BIT is that it excludes the most favored nation treatment. As in recent years, some foreign investors have sued India, arguing that they have to get the same beneficial treatment given to companies from other countries as well. And this has created a lot of troubles for the overall investment scenario in the country. Accordingly, India has dropped most favored nation clause from the model BIT. And this will also narrow down the scope of disputes. So, for example, if India and Brazil sign model BIT, then companies investing from Brazil into India would not be able to claim that they should be given the same treatment as, let's say, a Chinese company is getting in India. Now, the third provision is the most important. Model BIT applies a condition for initiating arbitration at international arbitrators, and that condition is that the aggrieved investor should use all remedies as well as negotiations and consultations before initiating arbitrations against the host state. The investors can use outside remedies only 5 years after resorting to all domestic arrangements. The provisions related to corporate social responsibilities have also been included into the model BIT. Now, the model BIT mandates foreign investors to voluntarily adopt internationally recognized standards of CSR. Now, you must have observed the decrease in FDI in last 3-4 years. And this is because of the unilateral termination of bilateral investment treaties by India. Apart from that, since such treaties work on reciprocal basis, the Indian investors in other countries do not have the option to sue the foreign governments as well. The main issues arising out of this model BIT is that since India is not giving MFN treatment and it's not allowing initiation of international arbitration, the Indian companies would also get the reciprocal, which means the same treatment when they go into those host countries as well. And hence, this is a problematic part of the model BIT. Let's now move on to the next article. The article titled The Right to Protest in a Free Society appears on editorial on page number 11. Now, this article is extremely important from the perspective of both interview and mains examination, as it evaluates the rights and options available to the citizens of India to hold our government accountable and to strengthen the democracy, and in the process convert our procedural democracy into a substantive one. Now, the author starts by stating that past few months, India has observed a lot of protests against various actions taken by the central government. Now, you must be reading a lot of news regarding protests against Citizenship Amendment Act, National Register of Citizens, and National Population Register as well. Now, according to author, such public protests are the hallmark of a free democratic society which demands that the voice of the people be heard by those in power and decisions be reached after proper discussion and consultation. Now, in this regard, author talks about three specific fundamental rights mentioned in Article 19.1. Now, as we know that Article 19.1a deals with the freedom of speech and expression, whereas Article 19.1c deals with right to form associations or unions, whereas Article 1b right to assemble peaceably and without arms. According to author Rajiv Bhargav, there can be two interpretations to such rights. Now, as far as the two interpretations are concerned, one is non-political. So, for example, freedom of speech and expression may be taken to mean that everyone has right to express their personal opinion on, let's say, films or on condition of a city they inhabit, like civic amenities, whereas right to form associations or unions can be naively or simply interpreted as right to conduct a picnic in a park or to participate in a religious festival such as Kumbh Mela. And as far as right to form associations or union is concerned, it may simply mean that it is a right to form self-regulating clubs, professional associations or societies. But as far as such interpretations written in blue color is concerned, these are important rights in an authoritarian and illiberal states which do not in general allow freedoms to their citizens. But as we know that India is a thriving democracy, and hence the interpretations of these rights written in blue color are obvious. But these are not the main reasons behind the creation of Article 19.1 as a fundamental right. Now, the main reasons behind giving such powers to the citizenry is political, as it constitutes the political freedom. And hence, the author insists on the second interpretation or widening of the scope of these three rights, which are written here in red color. Let us understand them. In a vibrant democracy like India, the right to free speech and expression transforms into the right to freely express opinion on the conduct of the government. And as you can see that people in India are free to both criticize and praise the government. And this power is expressly derived from Article 19.1a. Similarly, the right to peaceably assemble allows political parties and citizenship bodies such as university-based student groups to question and object acts of government by demonstration and agitations, and also to conduct public meetings to launch sustained protest movements against the ruling dispensation. If we apply the same logic to Article 19.1c, which deals with right to form associations or union, the right to association becomes the right to associate for political purposes, for instance, to collectively challenge government decisions and to even aim peacefully and legally to displace the government to not merely check abuse of power but to wrest power also. And this Article 19(1)(c) actually forms the basis of our vibrant democracy as it allows the existence of multi-party system in our democracy. Now let us analyze the role of the second interpretation of these rights into Indian democracy. Now as we know that in a democracy, the government is elected by the people. And once the government is elected, it functions usually for fixed years, and once it completes its time or it loses majority in the House of People, a new government is elected. Now this form of government is known as indirect democracy. Now under indirect democracy, people elect their representatives who, on the behalf of those who have elected them, formulate laws and carry out the day-to-day governance of the country. This right of every citizen to freely elect their government and when dissatisfied with its performance, to vote it out of the power is given by Article 326. Now in case of indirect democracy, now under an indirect democracy, this remains the only proper constitutional procedure to get rid of a government. But there is no mechanism as such in case of India where citizens can be involved in major decisions of the government in between those elections. So for example, when we elect a government, then according to the Constitution of India, we leave everything on Parliament and the executive. There is no involvement of the citizenry in a constitutionally institutionalized way to participate in lawmaking, in various executive decisions taken. And hence here, these three given by the Constitution of India comes into play. Now these set of interrelated political rights are meant to ensure that even when the government works in our interest, we don't take it for granted. Now these rights enable us to act as watchdogs and constantly monitor its acts. Through these rights, citizens not only raise various matters with the government but help in rectifying the mistakes as well. And overall, Article 19(1)(a), (b) and (c) make the government responsive. Now as far as the provisions of Constitution is concerned, the Indian democracy is procedural, which means that there is a formality which every citizen needs to do as far as election of the representatives are concerned and formation of the government is concerned. And after that, there is a minimal involvement of citizens in the functioning of the government as compared to a country like Switzerland, where the direct democracy is in practice and where people are involved in not only lawmaking but they also have power to recall their representatives. But utilizing the rights given in these three articles, we have an opportunity to convert this procedural democracy into a substantive one. And the author quotes two very specific and relevant examples of Sri Potti Sri Ramulu and Chipko movement, where rights given under the relevant articles which we have just discussed were utilized to bring about significant reform in the way government functions. As far as Sri Potti Sri Ramulu is concerned, he starved himself to death in order to draw attention of the Madras state government to the urgency of creating a new Telugu speaking state of Andhra Pradesh. And you might be aware from your static knowledge that Andhra Pradesh was the first state created on the basis of language, and this laid the foundation which was later utilized by other protest movements to carve out various other states. And as far as Chipko movement is concerned, people began to hug trees to prevent the then UP government from awarding contracts to commercial loggers. And this led to an awakening of environmental movement in the country. Not only these, Supreme Court has also upheld a right to protest as a fundamental right. So overall, this article becomes extremely important from the perspective of interview, where you might be asked to express your views on various protest movements being carried out in the country, especially the Shaheen Bagh, the right of the people to conduct such protest and demonstrations, and the significance of such protests in context of Indian democracy. And remember that such rights given in Article 19(1)(a), (b) and (c) convert our procedural democracy into substantive and real democracy, and these are important mechanisms which ensure that once a government is elected and it starts functioning, citizens of the country have accountability mechanisms by being a watchdog, by rectifying the mistakes and making the government responsive. And this acts as a feedback mechanism as the government, after taking into account such protest and demonstration, has to course correct their actions. Let's now move on to the next news.
Page number 9 of today's newspaper covers a very important information from the perspective of science and technology. It reads India, co builder of Hawaii telescope, wants it shifted out of proposed site. Now, this topic is important more from the perspective of science and technology. At the same time, this particular piece is important from the perspective of the prelims examination. Now, let's understand what is TMT or 30-meter telescope, who are the countries or the partners who are building the TMT, and why there's a proposal to move it out to any other location. So, TMT implies the 30-meter telescope. It is a new class of extremely large telescopes that will allow us to see deeper into the space. It will be around 3 times as wide and 9 times as large as the largest visible light telescope in the world. The primary objective of setting this telescope is to explore how first stars and galaxies were formed and how universe has shaped up in its current state. In the technical parlance, it will be exploring the first lights and their effects on the universe's evolution. Now, it is also important here to understand that TMTs have high resolution, which will extend scientists' capability to detect and investigate black holes that reside in the center of many galaxies. The telescope, once fully functional, will play a very important role in advancing our knowledge of the physical processes that lead to the star and planet formation. TMT will also help in studying the properties of exoplanets, which will help us in finding life beyond the Earth. So, this brings us to the next important question: who is building TMT? Now, when we talk about TMT, TMT is built by TMT International Observatory. And this international observatory is supported by 5 countries, which is US, Canada, China, Japan, and India. The total cost of the project is around $2 billion. Out of this, India's contribution is around 200 million. At the same time, since it's a visible light telescope, it will have 492 mirrors. And out of these 492 mirrors, 83 high polished mirrors have to be supplied by India. Now let us try to understand why India has supported the idea of shifting it to any other location. First and foremost is the sentiment of the indigenous people. The people who live in Hawaii have a special place for Mauna Kea, and that is why they have been opposing construction of 30-meter telescope on the site. At the same time, there are many telescopes which are built in the nearby areas, and hence India has supported the move to relocate the 30-meter telescope to some other location. Now, as mentioned in the newspaper, the protests have been going on for quite a significant period of time, and this has delayed it by over 5 years. Now, the TMT International Observatory Board has developed a Plan B, a secondary northern hemisphere site on which to construct the observatory. This will be La Palma, Canary Island of Spain. So there are strong chances that this telescope, which was earlier planned to be stationed at Hawaii, will be relocated to La Palma Island. Since we have talked about the visible light telescope, let's focus upon the other types of telescopes which are used for astronomy. These telescopes are primarily divided into 2 parts. First, the ground telescopes. So, optical telescopes, radio telescopes, and solar telescopes are primarily ground telescopes. At the same time, there are infrared telescopes, ultraviolet telescopes, X ray telescopes, microwave telescopes, and gamma ray telescopes, and these are space bound. The reason for this is very simple, since infrared, ultraviolet, X ray, microwave, and gamma ray radiation is blocked on the surface of the atmosphere. And hence, the telescopes which study based on these radiations cannot study from the ground. And hence, balloons or satellites are used to position these telescopes in the outer space, and this is how the study is normally being conducted. So now when we talk about optical telescope, The TMT telescope or 30-meter telescope was a type of an optical telescope. And as already mentioned, it gathers light from the visible wavelength of the electromagnetic spectrum. With this, we can observe the magnified image of a distant object in space. Similar to the optical is the radio telescope as well. Radio telescopes study radio frequencies which are coming from the various celestial bodies. At the same time, there is a difference between radio telescopes and optical telescopes. Now, it is important here to understand that most of the optical telescopes operate during night time only because they are observing the faintest light at the distant places. Now, when we compare the radio telescopes can operate in daytime as well as during the night time. So, this is the difference between the radio telescopes and optical telescopes. Giant meter wave radio telescope, which is located near Pune, is one such example which is stationed in India. Third type of telescopes which are important from the perspective of astronomy are solar telescopes, and as the name mentions, they are designed to observe sun in frequencies just outside the visible spectrum. McMath Piers is currently the largest solar and largest unobstructed aperture telescope in the world, which is located in Arizona, USA. So, optical, radio, and solar telescopes are primarily ground based telescopes. Now, let's focus on infrared telescopes. Now, infrared telescopes can detect far off astronomical objects in the dusty regions of the space. They also play a very crucial role in studying the state of the universe. Now, you must understand that infrared telescopes are fitted with special cameras which are constantly kept at cryogenic temperatures, which is like below minus 150 degrees Celsius. And these are coupled with solid state detectors. One of the primary example of infrared telescope is Spitzer Space Telescope. This space telescope was launched by NASA. Ultraviolet telescopes play a different role from infrared telescopes. They play an important role in astronomical observation as it reveals important characteristics such as chemical composition, temperature, and densities of the different celestial bodies. So, this is how the difference is between ultraviolet and infrared telescopes. The next category is X ray telescopes. X ray telescopes are designed to study extremely distant objects in X ray frequency. Since X ray frequencies are almost blocked by Earth's atmosphere, only space based telescopes can capture these wavelengths. NASA's Chandra telescope is also a type of an X ray telescope. Next is microwave telescopes, and these are important more from the perspective of identifying the origin and evolution of the universe. Last is gamma ray telescopes. Gamma rays are the most dynamic form of electromagnetic radiations. They are very important for the purpose of extragalactic studies. Hanley telescope at Ladakh in India is a type of gamma ray telescope. On the page number 10 of today's newspaper, there's an article about return of the bonds. Now, this talks about electoral bonds, the recent decision of the Supreme Court, and how there is a need to check the use of electoral bonds in India. In this context, we will try to understand what are electoral bonds and what are the concerns of the RBI. As far as this topic is concerned, this topic is important from the perspective of polity and governance, and as subtopic, it is related to elections. This topic can be used for prelims as well as for mains examination. So it is highly advisable that you make notes of this topic. Now, in order to understand electoral bonds in simple terms, let's first understand the basic definition of electoral bonds. The first and foremost is electoral bonds are bearer instrument. Now, in the context of electoral bonds, when we are talking about bearer instruments, it means they are interest free. A bearer instrument is a type of fixed income security in which no ownership information is recorded and the security is issued in physical form to the purchaser. At the same time, they are also of promissory nature. The moment we say it is promissory in nature, it means it is backed by guarantee that the payment will be made once the bond is redeemed. The second important aspect is that electoral bond shall be issued of any value. It means that it puts no limit in terms of donation to be made. And the donation can be made in the multiples of rupees 1000, rupees 10,000, rupees 1 lakh, rupees 10 lakh, and rupees 1 crore. We can see that through this mechanism, business houses and vested interests can make donation to political parties. Now, since we talked about transparency and electoral bonds was expected to fulfill that, the KYC of the buyer will be done, and electoral bonds can be bought at specific SBI branches. At the same time, these bonds will have a life of just 15 days. It means that whenever electoral bond is bought, it has to be redeemed in 15 days. Now just try to understand how this entire mechanism will work. Suppose this is a person or an institution which does digital payment after KYC, and electoral bond is being issued by the bank, in this case SBI. This bond can be transferred to political parties. There is one restriction that only those political parties can receive funding through electoral bond who have received at least 1% of the vote in the election. So this is the mechanism which looks like that there is enough transparency. However, there are a lot of problems in that, and let's try to understand the concerns as highlighted by the RBI in the article. Now the concern that the RBI is highlighted about corporate funding of elections. Earlier, there was a provision that companies cannot invest more than 7.5% of their average net profit over the previous 3 years. Now, this restriction has been removed, and this is a cause of concern for the funding aspect through electoral bonds. Moreover, now even the loss making companies can participate in electoral bonds and fund the political parties. At the same time, there was earlier a provision that the company should be in existence for 3 years. Now, this provision is also done away with. It means shell companies can be utilized for funding the political parties. And this is a big challenge because corporate funding of this type can hijack the agenda of democracy in India. Second important aspect is lack of transparency. In a democratic country, voters need to be aware of how the political parties are funded in order to ensure greater transparency in the election. However, through this mechanism, people are not informed about which political party has received funding from which corporate group, and hence this goes against the basic tenet of ensuring transparency in election funding. Last but not the least, we have also focused about foreign influence in elections. Now there is a system of secrecy for funding the political parties, as the election commission cannot monitor the funding through electoral bonds. And hence it is difficult to know whether black money or white money is utilized for the purpose of electoral bonds. Through shell companies, foreign vested interests can also route money, and this in turn will increase the ability of other countries to influence democratic process in India. Further, the amended foreign contribution regulation, that is FCRA rules, enable the political parties to accept donation from foreign companies. This leaves a scope for the foreign companies in influencing the Indian politics. So whatever we have discussed now is related to the concerns that RBI has highlighted in this article. Now the debate is on about how to ensure that what kind of funding political parties are getting and what are the sources of their funds.
The first question is, which of the following are correctly matched? Option 1, giant meter wave radio telescope is located in Sholapur, which is incorrect as it is located in Pune. And the second option is Chandra X-ray telescope is at Hanle, Ladakh, which is also incorrect, as Chandra X-ray telescope is a satellite revolving around the earth, and hence the right answer is D, neither one nor two. Now the second question is related to electoral bonds. Consider the following statements regarding electoral bonds. Option 1, electoral bonds do not have an expiry date, which is incorrect as electoral bonds have a lifetime of 15 days. And the second option is electoral bonds can be dematerialized, which is also incorrect as electoral bonds shall have to be always in the paper format, and hence the right answer is D, neither one nor two. Third question, consider the following statements. The statement 1 is right to protest has been mentioned in Article 19, which is incorrect. Although right to protest has been interpreted from the provisions of Article 19, but it has not been mentioned in the same article. And the statement 2 is Article 19(1)(b) contains the reasonable restrictions to the freedoms, which is incorrect as these restrictions are contained within Article 19(2), and hence again the right answer is neither 1 nor 2. With this, we come to the end of today's DNS. Let's have a look at the question of the day. Now, in past few days, various viewers have requested us to read out the question of the day as well. So, we are going to read out the question of the days as well. So, question of the day for 22nd of January 2020 is consider the following statements regarding telescopes. First, optical telescopes function during the daytime only. Statement 2, X-ray telescopes function during both day and night. Now you have to select the correct answer using the codes which are option A 1 only, option B 2 only, option C both 1 and 2, and option D neither 1 nor 2.